Today's episode is brought to you by Sports Magic.
It's high noon.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to High Noon Podcast, the competitive Overwatch podcast. I'm your host, Blevins. With me, as always, is Deathblow. What's up, buddy?
Not too much, my man. How are you doing?
Oh, fine. I know I sound very.
Your team's still alive. Get the energy up.
True. That is very true. We have made it through a round of playoffs, and though we did get a loss, we are not out yet, and putting up a fight. Being down might be the best thing for NY, but we'll be talking about that in just a little bit here because, of course, playoff season.
Playoffs? Don't talk about it. Playoffs?
Oh, Jim, we are talking about playoffs because now is actually an appropriate time, the most appropriate time to be talking about playoffs.
Yeah, shut up, Jim Mora.
Yeah, idiot. Don't tell us, back in whatever year you said that to not talk about the Overwatch League playoffs, the thing that certainly wasn't even a thought in anyone's mind at the time, and you certainly didn't know about.
I'm sorry, Jim. I take it back. I think you were a great coach.
I know very little about you, but I'm sure you're a good guy. But let's get on into it. Before we do, though, of course, Blackwatch Report, sticking to it, keeping up all the Tier 2, Tier 3, and other Overwatch action that is going on. I know we are entering the dwindling days of this season of Overwatch League, but Blackwatch Report is keeping you up to date with everything else that's going on in Overwatch. Make sure you're checking them out on their feed. Blackwatch Report everywhere that you can find podcasts. Blackwatch Report without the O on Twitter, because that's how Twitter limits work.
And hey, go over there, show our boys some love. Listen, it's about to be a really, really rough time for Thornrain. We're moving into the football season. That means the Cleveland Browns have to start playing games again. It's going to get rough over there for that man. So head over there and show him some support. He's going to need it coming up in the next few weeks, I think.
And though, and I'm stealing your thunder here, Death. And though some of their players may like to get crapped on, the team as a whole probably doesn't like to.
Hey, listen, all I know is Odell Beckham Jr. is the number 2 wide receiver on the Cleveland Browns.
Oh, dumb Beckett Jubs. We love you, Thorn, and Kyle, too, although you don't have a football team preference that we like to make fun of on the show. So if you want to tell us who your team is or, whatever sport, we will feel free to rag on you for that. But Death, anything fun and exciting happened for you over the week?
Well, no. To go in a negative direction, I had funerals and wakes this weekend, and that's part of why the show was delayed and recorded on Tuesday instead of Monday. My grandmother passed away very recently, and so been a little distracted, and I'm trying to keep up with everything anyways, but it's been a little tough. So it was even literally like the funeral was today, everything like that. So it's been a rough week and a rough couple days, but I appreciate the love in chat already and everything like that. So back to my distraction, though. We'll just get more into some Overwatch League, but as far as anything else, I played some Valorant this weekend, and having trouble getting my boys into Overwatch, although it's all I'm itching to play, but I'm a little bit with them because I just want to play main tank, and you just can't do that right at the moment. So it's a little rough out there in the Overwatch world. There's a lot of people that love it, and there's a lot of people frustrated by it. So it's a normal meta, I suppose.
Yeah, it's the same as always.
Yeah, but I've been popping off in Valorant a little bit. trying to get the guys together. It's really tough too, especially with the new game, because like we always stack up. We don't play if we don't have 3, 4, 5 players, right? Like we're just not going to do it. And stacking just makes your game so much more difficult. The level of coordination, the likelihood of Smurf squads on the other side, or something like that goes up tremendously. But we're holding our own. We're definitely farming some wins at this point. And yeah, I had a stretch of games where I was like match MVP in 3 out of 4 of them, or something like that. And yeah, I was doing well. So have been trying to have some fun with that. Very frustrating game for me, but I'm still doing it for some reason.
Well, and speaking of frustrating games, one game that we've both been playing has become less frustrating for you as your arch nemesis, the Galaxies and Teamfight Tactics, are now gone.
True. Been picking that up again a little bit as well. It's weird. It's like when it's a strategy game where, you make impactful decisions. I enjoy it. And when there's Galaxies and those decisions are made for you by dice rolls at the beginning of the game, then I don't like it. That's weird. Anyways, I digress.
It's gone. It's gone now. It's gone now. For me, I really didn't do anything of any importance whatsoever in the past week. So normal week for me.
Very excited for that to be this upcoming week for me. I'll say that.
Yes. So let's move on. And because of the state of Overwatch League right now, we don't have Break It Down, but we've got plenty of It's Tournament Talk. Oh boy, Death. We have let's see, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 23. No. Okay, some of those haven't played. 20-ish matches of Overwatch.
I think it was like 18.
18. Okay, yeah. I'm counting some of the ones that are already populated but haven't happened yet. Yeah, so like almost 20 matches of Overwatch happened.
So much Overwatch this weekend.
So let's, Death, we got to start at the top, bud.
We do.
Boston Uprising defeating the Houston Outlaws 3-1. I know Shrug in chat has shown up specifically to hear this one, so
a lot of people will tune in for this one. I mean, like I was very vocal about it after the match on Twitter. It's very easy to deduce what went wrong in this game. And that is a woefully undercoached and unprepared team tried to do something that's never been viable in the history of Overwatch. And they tried to do it at a time when it makes as little sense as humanly possible for their strategy to be effective. This was purely a coaching failure to me. There's just no 2 ways around it. They lost to a team that had previously won 2 games on the season. That we discussed as potentially being actually worse at Overwatch than the 0-40 Shanghai Dragons from season 1. We unironically had that conversation. They tried to run Pharah in a hit scan meta. That's it. They treated it like it was a lock and load must pick. They spent, I don't know how long, months training a DPS player to become their main tank. And then when they needed their main tank to play a DPS favored hero like Roadhog, they swap in a different DPS player to do it to free up their main tank player to fly around in the sky and play Pharah. Now, if you want to run Pharah, I have no issue with it being hydration, right? The man was previously like transcendent on the hero. Like he did things that nobody else was really able to do on it. And this was, I'm talking back season 1. If there's other people you want to say are better, fine. This is a history lesson, not a me trying to like compare people from recent times. So I have no issues with hydration being that guy. But the Roadhog was perfect for him. What we're seeing throughout this tournament is that kind of the best Roadhogs for the teams that are using it are the main tank players that adapt into it. There's a certain amount of positioning and coordination and a style to this version of Roadhog. If you're running him as your main tank, you still kind of need him to operate as your main tank, and he needs to control space and hold corners and just absolutely play it much like you would a Reinhardt in a way. You're playing on your corners and you're using your natural cover because you don't have a shield, but you're still kind of in the same position. And now we have Blasé coming in and playing it. And I thought he did a pretty good job. I mean, people were talking about how great Fusions looked. I kind of thought Blasé outperformed Fusions, but he did it in a different style that was kind of worse for the team, right? He was much more flanky. He was much more Genji player, found himself on Roadhog, or Doomfist player is the accurate one, right? Because that's what he plays. And it just didn't quite have the same level of impact. But I did think he kind of outperformed Fusions. I thought he got more value out of the pick than Fusions did. This fight was lost in the hero select screen, and apparently their first scrim, because in a meta game where Widowmaker and Ashe are two of the best DPS selections, they decided we can run Pharah with a 100% pick rate and it's just going to work. And that's, like I said, something that's never once been true in the history of Overwatch. Like, even when Widowmaker and McCree and Ashe suck, it doesn't work because you have D.Va, you have Anna, who were both also mainstays in the lineup for the Boston Uprising. They never left. They counter the Pharah. You're doing it. Why would we stop doing that, right? It was just asinine. Just absolutely ridiculous that there was no backup strategy. They going into the last map, they played it on everything. Lijiang Tower Control Center, like literally everywhere. It doesn't matter how bad it historically is. It doesn't matter anything. They're just like, nope, this is right? This has never been true. There's no indication that this should be true. Every theory crafting you could possibly do tells you Pharah's this ain't it, Chief. Like, this isn't the patch for her. Next patch is live server patch. I could see that being a viable strategy because they really aren't doing a lot to nerf the hit scans, and they're adding damage fall off to Widowmaker and all these things, right? Why are they doing those things, Dream? Why are they doing those things, Harsha? Because the hit scan heroes are overpowered. So you just literally three-headed your way into being beaten by the worst team in the Overwatch League. You all should be fired. Literally everybody in the coaching staff should just go. And you've got to rebuild again, because like, they just literally the worst coaching job I can remember seeing in Overwatch League. I can't even like sit there and blame the 0-40 Shanghai Dragons entirely on their coaching staff. But good portion of it was just the roster wasn't capable, et cetera, et cetera. This roster was absolutely capable of the task at hand.
Yep.
The fact that everybody loves to pick on the Houston Outlaws and nobody wants to give them credit. Nobody picks them in any pick'ems ever. 95% of brackets were busted by this game.
Yeah.
Less than 5% of people that filled out brackets in the game picked the Boston Uprising to beat the Houston Outlaws, because that's how bad they were. And that is how bad of a coaching job they did. And then Dream gets on Twitter and says, Scrimbucks. Like, okay, cool. No, like, nobody cares. And he even prefaces it like, I know people hate when we use this, but like, we didn't. We lost once to a very good team. That was it. And it's you think maybe because they're like, we're not going to try to answer this Pharah because it's the stupidest thing we've ever seen and we're never going to have to answer it. And if we do, we can just play one hit scan player and we'll have it completely shut down. Maybe that's what happened. Like, there's no reason for you to be trying to run Pharah that often.
Here's what I think happened. They were, and I think rightly so, going through, hey, what can we play to spice things up, right? Because it's not, they are obviously practicing for Boston, but they're also going to be scrimming and practicing for past Boston, right? Because, like you said, 95% of people pick Houston in this match. It's as close to a gimme as possible, or it should be, right? So what strat can we come up with that's not necessarily on meta, which we've talked about? What's the Hail Mary that you can throw? What's this? Okay. So trying to find it. This is what happened, because you say it's never worked in the history of Overwatch. The only times I can ever think of it working is when a team was just markedly and very much so better at the game than the other team, and the Pharah Mercy was just better than the hit scan, right? Like, if you have a Grandmasters player playing against, Plat DPS, sure, that can happen. And we've seen like NYXL at times has like flexed on teams with the Farah when it wasn't good, right? And they still won because it just
Sure.
didn't matter. So what probably happened, and what is where Dream is just so wrongly trying to defend him. I mean, it's right for him because he might as well try to defend himself because he should lose his job,
Personally,
right?
I don't even think it was like I'm trying to defend ourselves or anything
Well,
like that. I just think it's like, I know you guys are mad, but like this is why we did it, right? Like not even like justification, more like explanation. That's at least how it read to me.
yeah.
Because like he was very conciliatory, like we yeah, that was bad, we screwed up, not
Right.
like, oh, we just played poorly or something like that. He wasn't defending the strategy. He's like, listen, this is why we landed on it, because it just worked for us for a while. And I get that, but
yeah,
I'm sorry,
here's the thing. Like, if you're playing against teams that are worse than you, which I'm assuming, like, they're not scrimming against Overwatch League teams, right? They're scrimming against.
I'm sure they are.
Oh, okay, well, maybe
I would assume.
I don't know how the scrimming works, but if you're playing, like, two things, you're either playing against a team that you are just better than and skilled than. So, like, yeah, if the Farah goes unanswered, like, it can be good, right? Like, we know that. And, like, so if you have teams that, even if they are good teams, if they're not ready for it, it can catch them off guard. But a good team, or even just apparently not even a good team, the Boston Uprising just knows it's like one of the basic things in Overwatch. It's like one of the first things you learn when you understand the game even a little bit. Hey, the team picked Farah. Go Soldier 76. Go Ashe. Go Widowmaker. Shoot the flying thing out of the air with the gun that will put a bullet where you put your cursor, right? Like that, and then like, oh, they went Winston. Go Reaper. Those are like the two like most basic things that you learn about Overwatch, the game. Not even like strategy or anything. Like very basic. Like rock, beats, scissors. It's not hard. So I kind of get the like, oh, well, we were throwing rock and they had paper, but wow. I just swore.
You did.
Wow.
You did. Like a real swear that you actually have to go in and
I have to go and edit out. That's fine.
Yeah.
Wow, that's like I don't know if I've ever done it.
You swore.
I know.
Not even me.
In 200 plus episodes, I think that's the first time that I have. I think you in the early days did a couple of times, but
I had some issues.
But those are like years ago. Wow. I'm falling apart here talking about a team I don't even care about. Yeah, I know, right?
Shame.
I don't even care about this. But I completely lost my train of thought too. No, so basically what it boils down to is you tried something that was against the grain, and you go into it, you know it's bad. You have to, right? There's no way. You can ask any Overwatch player who has any sort of like understanding. Platinum up, sure. Any even gold. You can even get in like that has any sort of understanding of the game at all, and no, this is a bad idea. So, and you can go against that, right? You can find ways to go, but like it's a bad idea, right? So if it works in scrims, you have to think, why is this working? And I don't think that level ever happened, because it's like, oh well, we're winning in scrims, therefore let's just do it. Let's rock it. Let's keep doing it, and we keep catching people off guard, and like we can do it. But like,
in their defense, they're not the only team that saw an opportunity to play some Farah here. There's other teams that did it. There's other teams that did it well. They picked their spots, and they used it where it was appropriate, and where the map allowed, and where the map was friendly. And listen, we've talked a lot in other times. This team, other teams, we believe it to be true. There's always the parallel universe where it works and you're a genius, et cetera, et cetera. So we don't have problems with teams coming out with a pocket strategy.
Right.
Hey, maybe they can't make their hit scan work, or maybe we think Hydration's just better than Jerry and he'll be able to shut him down and get in his face. I don't mind if they make that read going into the match. I mind that at the end of it in map 4, when you're like, this isn't working, this can't work, like you're losing to Boston, they just rolled it out again and continued to get stomped. There was no backup plan. That's truly the problem. The actual issue is not, hey, we thought Farah was the call or something like that. Like, you're going to be wrong sometimes. You're going to be right sometimes. That's true for everybody. That's true for Krusty. That's true for literally every coach in the league. The issue is that you were so ill prepared, that your game plan was so shallow, that you completely put all your eggs in the one basket, and that basket is the easiest thing to counter in Overwatch.
That basket
You
is
got countered
flying
by the worst
above
team in
head.
Overwatch.
Yeah, you get shot
And
down.
it's honestly, they should really just be embarrassed at the performance from the coaching staff. There's not too much else for it, and honestly, I think both of them are going to really. There's more than just Dream and Harsha, but Harsha's the head coach, so he gets the primary criticism.
Right.
And then Dream is the most vocal of all of them on social media, so he kind of a little bit like holds the banner in its own way. But I would think that literally that was so bad. I think they have trouble finding work in the Overwatch League after that performance. We'll see if the team is willing to cut bait after one season with them as their coach,
right.
But the GM that hired them is gone, so I can't imagine there's baked in loyalties or anything like that. I really don't know. Outside of this kind of complete collapse and misfire of a performance, I think they would have just been guaranteed the second year, but I don't know. That was brutal.
Yeah, I mean, just really bad, mismanaged, and you talked about it, and yes, there's always in your defense, Death, you keep it as even keeled when talking about Houston, as you actually go too far over sometimes to not go super hard towards Houston. They had some good looks here. They could have made a decent little run. I mean, they should have beat Boston, and then they end up playing. They play against Reign. They're not. They're not favored the rest of the tournament, right? But they make a little run that I don't know. It's sad, honestly, but.
In my bracket, I had them getting the 3 wins, right? I actually had them beating the Gladiators in the lower bracket, which the performance they put out. I mean, I didn't know Birdring was going to be sick and literally have to be carried away from his computer, et cetera, et cetera. But I mean, the Gladiators got blown out in that spot in the bracket where I had Houston making it to. It was by Florida, which is a much better team, but still, you could see there was an opening, not to be crazy, but I mean, let's rip the Band-Aid off. I've got Washington leaving in their first game of this upcoming weekend, and but there's so much positivity, there's so much hype around them right now because nobody expected them to be alive going into this weekend, and that could have been you. And even though at the end of the day, getting knocked out in the second week of the playoffs isn't actually much more beneficial than being knocked out when Houston got knocked out.
Right.
It changes the narrative. It gives your fans that little something, or et cetera. It would have been
builds the resume.
Very, very positive for the franchise as a whole, and they just punted it.
Yep. Well, that is what it is, and that is the end of the season for the Houston Outlaws, and we'll of course be following them in the future. But Death has moved on to I would say greener pastures, but Houston green, so I guess less green pastures. I don't know. Okay, we're not going to spend that much time on every match. Don't worry, we're not going to be here for 5 hours. Up next in this first round, we had Washington Justice take on Vancouver Titans 3-0. Do we want to talk? Do we want to pause on each match, or do we want to just rip through the bracket and then stop on and then
just
go
rip
back
through the bracket?
Okay.
We'll stop and go back.
So that was round 1, and then moving on to round 2, we had LA Gladiators winning 3-2 versus Toronto Defiant, Atlanta Reign beating the Boston Uprising 3-1, and then Washington Justice winning 3-0 versus the Dallas Fuel. We move on to the third round. We're now starting. Now every team is now in at this point.
And it's a true bracket now as well. No more picks, anything.
No more picks. Just straight up double elim bracket from here on out. Philly Fusion beats the LA Gladiators 3-0. LA Valiant beats the Florida Mayhem 3-2. Shock beats the Washington Justice 3-2. Atlanta Reign beats the Paris Eternal 3-2. So unlike some of the other weeks we've had, Death, there's a lot of 3-2s here and not as much 3 Overwatch, which is nice.
Yeah.
And we also
Very high compete level for the playoffs.
Yeah,
Great to see.
which is awesome to see. And then of course, as I say that, we move on to the losers bracket where Florida Mayhem beat the LA Gladiators 3-0 and Washington Justice beat the Paris Eternal 3-0. And then we played one more winners side round here where Philly Fusion bumped down the LA Valiant 3-0 and San Francisco Shock bumped the Reign down with a 3-1 victory. So we have for this week, we're going to be having the only two winners remaining, the 1 and 2 seeds, not so coincidentally enough, Philly Fusion and San Francisco Shock. And then on the lower bracket, we have Atlanta Reign versus Florida Mayhem and LA Valiant versus the Washington Justice. Death, I mean, we talked about it before, and we've been talking about it ever since Decay got signed.
Shame.
Washington Justice are making a little bit of a run, controversy or not. They're putting up some results here.
Yeah. Ironically, the Justice scumbagging their way into relevancy in the playoffs is definitely a thing. They're an interesting case, and if you remove yourself from the dislike of that situation, if you share it, and to be honest, I don't know anybody that's like, oh yeah, that's great, right? There's just people that are like, I just don't care that much. Yeah, it was scummy, it was shady or whatever, but whatever, let's just play Overwatch.
Right. Which, I can at least understand that.
I kind of get it. I don't know. If you think it's scummy, then why are you letting your sports leagues get away with doing it? That's why they keep doing it. But nonetheless, they are making a run, and they're kind of doing things a little bit differently than everybody else is. Like nobody's really playing their composition. They're going with the Zarya Roadhog. Most teams are opting for the Diva Roadhog, or they're opting for the dive composition that we talked a lot about last week with Frito. Notably, I think it's telling that the best teams are the ones that are trying to do the dive, at least from my observations thus far. And again, I did miss a couple of these. I'm still going back and watching some matches with everything going on this weekend. But you've got teams like Philly, hasn't dropped a map yet. They seem to really be leaning on the dive style. Shanghai, from what I've seen, seems to be really all about it. I believe Seoul is as well, although I've got a big circle around Seoul. I haven't seen any of their matches. They were like just in 3-0s all weekend, and so they weren't high on my list because they weren't highly competitive. But I do really, really want to see what's going on there. We'll get to that bracket more in a little bit. But Washington they're playing the competitive mode composition that everybody's seeing on ladder right now. They're just doing it with the Zarya. It really fits them with Decay. It allows them to bench Roar, who really needed to be benched all year. It's funny, like their other tank option was again stuck in visa hell, but he had been for a year and a half, 2 years or whatever it was. So they had infinity opportunities to bring him in, and now they just managed to pull it off by, we just won't play a main tank. Like they really backed in, lucked their way into being able to field a much better roster in this instance. And also you have to shout out what Stitch was able to do this weekend. He absolutely popped off. Now, I don't really think they've faced stiff competition yet, if I'm being perfectly honest with you. Like, let's look through their bracket, and bear with me. I know Paris is on the list. I didn't forget. But you've got the Vancouver Titans. They 3-0'd, and there's not much of a competition there, right? We all know the problems that the Vancouver Titans have. They're a shell of what they once were. So no surprises there. I'm pretty sure most people picked it that way. Then you've got them going into Dallas, a shell of what they once were, right? Like the piece they revolved around switched to the other side of the stage. And shout outs to Crimzo for the tweet. Like, he didn't say anything wrong. He didn't do anything right. He got a lot of publicity and a lot of attention. But he just said, like, losing to a guy that held your team hostage for 2 months really hits different, or something like that, like in his tweet, and gives you some insight that it really does seem like Decay just like up and decided, like, I'm not doing this anymore, and like just really to me it's just childish, it's obnoxious. Like, you're a professional at something, shut up, show up, and do your job.
Right.
And he just decided not to do that. And it sparked a conversation about how the balance of power is so drastically in the players' favor, the way these contracts are structured. The teams have no ability to do anything. And I think it's so funny because we've had the conversations about what happened with Crystal and the lawsuit with Guangzhou. And
Right.
I got blasted for taking the side of the organization
Right.
in Discord and stuff like that. And it's, oh, look, some people that have had a peek behind the curtains think that it's probably like the orgs need help. They need
Right.
to be able to do something. But when they sue a player, I mean, it's just, it's wrong. Like, you just can't do that. But it's, seemingly people in the know tend to think the balance of power is way too much in the player's side. And that makes sense, right? Like, where is Surefour for Toronto?
Right.
Like, what's going on there, right? Like, if you don't think he's retiring, you're not paying attention. And you've seen it with Decay. We've seen it with really all of Vancouver too, to an extent. Like, I get it. You didn't like that they kept moving you, but like, you signed a contract to play for the team. To me, at the end of the day, okay, I'm never signing for you again. I'm never playing for you again, but I'm also not striking or whatever that, I don't know. It is what it is. We don't need to rehash ancient history here. But you move through the bracket here for the Justice, and now you've got them playing against the Paris Eternal in the losers bracket. They did play really, really well against San Francisco.
Yeah.
Although San Francisco just seemed a little bit lost. And again, this is, to me, a little bit the Chengdu effect, right? Like, nobody was practicing against what the Justice were doing because only the Justice were doing it. And it took San Francisco some time to figure it out and, get the counter for it. And then when they did, they reverse swept, ran the table. First reverse sweep in franchise history, by the way. Ironic to you'd think that the best team would have more of those, but at the same time,
because they're not down 0-2.
Yeah. So, and really, they've either been the best in the league or bottom three, and bottom three is not going to pull off reverse sweeps too often. So it makes sense, but still surprised me to hear that stat rattled off. So they did obviously have a very tough match there, played well. So a lot of credit to them for that. But if you remember last week, Blevins, you remember I had an arrow up and an arrow down. Who my arrow down was?
Your arrow down was Florida?
They were the arrow up.
They're the arrow up. I knew they were
the
part
arrow
of
down
it.
was Paris.
Yes.
And just they needed to do things with their tanks and their tanks are like maybe the least flexible tanks in the league.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just really didn't work out for them. I also was pleasantly surprised at the beginning that they were like playing Sparkle on a role that he normally wouldn't have, right? Like, he was on the Sombra. Usually that would have been soon, but it's playoffs time, and that's the time when you play your best players, and you just need to roll out Sparkle and Eggsy. And while they didn't quite do that, it was like Sparkle and Nico, and that to me was a really big part of the problem. Was you just aces in your places. Like, this is it. This is the show. We've seen teams get a lot of value out of using their bench depth throughout the season, because then when you need them, now they're better than they were. I'm looking at you, Hisu. You were bad in the beginning of the year. It was a head scratcher that you were being played, and the coaching staff used you. They got you better. You could see the improvement in his game throughout the course of the season. And now we get to a situation where we want Ash and Widowmaker and Tracer all on the stage at the same time, and Sombra all on the stage at the same time. And you get to play Carpe and Hisu, and they're both playing really, really well. And that's a beautiful example of a coaching staff using their pieces, improving over the course of the season, even though we're calling it out and we're what are you playing him for throughout the season? You get to see it when it works. You get to see it,
the
right?
True five-head.
The coaching staff actually brought out the best in the players and coached them up, and so great job there. But yeah, that's something that maybe like it works when the players have a ceiling that you can reach that's acceptable. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But like, I'm not sure Soon and Nico really have that ceiling. And so I think they were just ill-equipped for this meta with the amount of flexibility that you really did need in your roster, in your tank line. And so, yeah, I think that's a pretty big factor in why it was like 3-0 for the Justice. They had like their own way. They were doing well. They were feeling it. They were on a roll, and they hit a team that was on the struggle bus and just having a rough time. So we will see. I mean, the Valiant are far from an unbeatable foe. But they were able to take down the Florida Mayhem. So there's something going on there, right? They're clearly doing pretty good. I need to watch the Valiant versus Florida game a little more closely. It was like on while I was heavily distracted. But yeah, the Justice, there's no denying how strong they look in this meta game. I like that they have a slightly different take on it. My heart goes out to you, Dallas Fuel fans, because I can't imagine what that would be like to watch that rule that was added in for COVID be taken advantage of, and you to have the player that was bad enough you lost him and your team was doomed, but then to get knocked out by him, like Crimzo said, it hits different.
And to have him like take your team down beforehand too, right? Like
and then like the news comes out that he was really just disruptive and harmful to the team environment, and like it really goes a long way to explain why Dallas was so up and down throughout the year.
Right.
So yeah, I don't know, expecting Dallas to be full Western next year, but we shall see. I don't know. So props to the Justice. Enjoy it while it lasts. I can't imagine you get the salty run back against the Shock. It's probably a coin flip against the Valiant here coming up, but we'll pick our way through the brackets here in a minute. But yeah, they're definitely a team doing things different, doing things well at the moment, and they're the spicy underdog story that I think a lot of people were hoping would come up in this playoffs. It's really just a shame that it was the dirtbags that manipulated the rule that are doing it, because it takes something, instead of being just all fun and all great, and you know what I mean? Like it just would have all been positive, and proven that they should have opened it up to everybody with the weird season, et cetera. And it's just not that, right? It's just slightly different, and it's cheapened, and it's worse now as a result. But credit for where it's due. I mean, the coaching staff, the players, those guys are all immune to my feelings, right? Like not that they care, or I'm saying they care, but like what I say negative things about the Justice, it's not about the coaches, it's not about the players. They didn't make the decision to bring them in. They're just making do with what they have, and the players and the coaches are stepping up and figuring it out and putting it together a bit. So credit where it's due. The players and the coaching staff for the Justice are putting on a show.
Right. It's not just having the player, or you can have all the pieces in line, but you actually have to execute, which is, again, credit where credit's due. It's good to see that that's happening, regardless of what you think. So,
and hey, a heel is fun. I'm enjoying that. I hate that. I'm looking forward to watching him get knocked out, and I'm looking forward to Overwatch matches. So I guess at the end of the day, a bad guy isn't maybe the worst thing in the world, but yeah, big sorry to Dallas fans. That's rough.
Which is certainly something I didn't think we would be saying on the show. But
who do you want to talk about here in the NA bracket?
Ah, man. I mean, for me, it's really like the only other match that was really, it's not even a thonker, but just like, I think a pretty big upset is that LA Valiant versus the Florida Mayhem. And it's really interesting because LA, gets the nail biter against Florida, wins 3-2, which, I mean, again, it's super close match, and then LA just gets dumpstered by Philly 3-0. And then Florida wins 3-0 in the losers bracket versus the Gladiators. So it's like, man, I kind of want to see that matchup again, honestly. Like, and it's honestly, it's probably favored to happen here, right? Like, it would be Florida over Atlanta, and then LA over Washington, and we get that matchup again. I mean, I don't know, Jeff. I think most people will be picking the Justice, recency bias, et cetera, et cetera. Sure.
Also, they just do look strong, right?
Yeah.
So teams have to figure them out. But now there's, all this tape, right? How many matches did the Justice play? 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 4 matches worth of tape on them running this composition for teams
and a
to
week
sit
to
down,
train on it, right?
Analyze, break down. find an opponent that can run what they're running and scrim against it. And the other Overwatch League teams, I would hope, at least the ones with good environments, are stepping up and doing that. You do that for other teams when you're out, so that way when you're in, there's teams out there willing to step up and do it for you. So hopefully that's the case, but also with everything bracketed, right, you can just schedule your scrim blocks with the other side of the bracket as well, but it's harder to get them to play what you need to play against. But I think the time to sit down and break it down gives the Valiant quite an ability to level the playing field in this fight. And when you look at, Florida getting, or I'm sorry, Florida, 3-0ing the Gladiators, and the Valiant, they played against, what happened with Paris in one of these teams? Oh, never mind. I was looking ahead at Atlanta. That's on the other side of the bracket. You got Atlanta like in the knockdown, drag out 5-map brawl against Paris, who was kind of bad, right? Like it's easy to see a way where the Atlanta Reign just don't quite have it in them, and aren't able to take down a team like Florida, who personally I think the meta should fit them pretty well, but I'm not as confident in what they were doing. I think they might have been showing like multiple looks. I know they swapped around BQB and Yaki in their roles, and ended up putting Yaki on Sombra, I think, for a later match against the Gladiators. And Florida's still figuring out how they want to play things, and it's going to be really interesting to see what they're able to do. On paper, to me, the meta favors them, right? Because there's so much Ashe, there's so much Sombra, I think Tracer's an option. And I think too, there's a chance the meta changes kind of significantly and moves more towards the dive compositions. Like I said, the better teams seem to be playing that. It does take a lot of coordination to beat the Roadhog based compositions that way. So, the Justice don't have that luxury to make that switch, for example, and maybe the Valiant don't either. But I think a team like Florida can definitely double down and commit on that strategy, though I think they were running it a decent amount as well. And I also think instead of it being like Sombra and Reaper as the composition in this dive, like if the Roadhog starts to leave the meta, does the Reaper become Tracer? Because if it does, that just falls right into the hands of the Florida Mayhem even more. And it just puts them exactly where they want to be, instead of something that theoretically should be decent for them. But I've talked a lot about the awkward hero pools that their DPS players have. They're great players. I love them. They're phenomenal talents, but they're a little bit like BQB's a little bit locked in on a couple heroes he can play. And Yaki's a little bit more spread out all over the place, but he like crosses over into flex DPS territory. They don't have another hit scan, or you know what I mean? Like it's just hard to make the pairing work sometimes.
It's hard to line it up right the way that you want it to.
I when I look at what's being played, I feel like they shouldn't have that problem. I feel like every Overwatch League level DPS player can pick up the Reaper and play it fine and do well for you there. And so as long as Yaki's right at home inside his hero pool, or BQB's right at home inside his hero pool, it should work for him. But obviously it didn't work to their wildest expectations with the loss to the Valiant. But we'll see. I think that's a team that's well coached, well positioned, and it's got a really solid roster across the board. So there's a good chance they get things figured out and are able to try to complete this run, because the Shock look beatable. So I think what we're probably looking at, I mean, let's just kind of lay out there my bracket the rest of the way. There's not a ton of games here. I've got the Fusion beating the Shock. They're not going to continue 3-0 all the way through the bracket, I don't think, but they're untouched right now. I don't know how you pick San Francisco to win that game after watching them all play this weekend. So let's pencil Fusion into the finals here. And then looking down at the losers, okay, so that moves Shock down, and then so they go there. All right, so then we've got the losers bracket games. I'll take Florida. I'll take the rematch that you want. I'll take Florida winning. I'll take the Valiant winning. And then I'll take Florida coming out of that. So we're talking about Florida versus San Francisco for the last spot on the plane to Asia to play out. it's got to be shock, right?
I was
Like,
gonna say it is a ballsy pick to not pick San Francisco there, but
I can absolutely envision the world where that happens.
Yeah.
Because I do think there's more to it's something I've brought up in the past, but I really think letting Architect go was a mistake for this team, because now there are DPS issues, despite how talented everybody is and how many they have that are really talented. There's narrow hero pools there. There's things now that Rascal's good and all, and there's a lot of heroes he excels in, but he's fallible. He's not
right.
an MVP. He's not Prophet. He's not one of those guys. He just picks up the weird and the brand new at a level that nobody else does, right? Like, he gets to pro level Baptiste before anybody else. It doesn't matter what role it is. He's the guy that his understanding of the game must just be so complete that he can just figure out how to make these things work.
Yeah.
But he doesn't necessarily play all of them at the absolute A1 elite level. And so I give Krusty's more than earned the benefit of the doubt that he'll get this team figured out, playing well. We saw them have a pretty massive turnaround in the matchup versus Washington. So, we've seen it on the short term. We've certainly seen it on the long term, him turn this team around.
Yeah.
I assume he will, and they'll be on the trip. So, yeah, I don't know, anything you want to change there? I think we might actually be in agreement.
Yeah, it's tough to. I mean, part of me wants to see the rematch between Florida and LA, because I feel like that's the biggest single match that's happened so far. That was like
entertainment factor,
right? But also, again, taking out the whole decay thing.
Shame.
The Washington story is pretty compelling, and seeing them make a run and continue a run would be interesting and would be fun to watch. It also gives us a very clear team to root against. So, again, taking all the drama out of it, I could certainly see them continuing that run. I agree with everything that you said. The surprise factor.
I think the Valiant are a much better, more complete team. All that goes up. It's a very close match. It really is, because Washington is that good, and being able to play against other teams that don't play that comp as well, just to be comfortable against it, doesn't always prepare you for the team that's well oiled and been scrimming it for a month and is doing it the right way.
Yep.
It doesn't always prepare you and get you ready. So you're absolutely right to call that out. Is I hope it didn't sound like I was just like, oh, this is happening. You guys are crazy for picking it. No, it's absolutely a coin flippable kind of a match. But
pretty much every match from here on out is gonna be you can make a really good argument for either side of it, I think.
Yeah. Unless Philly gets into the lower bracket, then they'll clean up and run the table through it. But
right. So I think if Philly wins against San Francisco, it's going to be Philly and probably San Francisco again going to Asia. But if San Francisco, I guess if San Francisco, if Philly wins, I think it could possibly be San Francisco. It could be another team. If Philly loses, then it's going to be Philly and San Francisco. I agree with that. But yeah, I think we're pretty much in agreement. So let's move on to the Asia bracket here, but first we will take a quick break and we'll be right back. All right, we are back from the break, and that means Asia Pacific. Let's just start it over. Asia Pacific. Yeah. Now we're actually back from break. Asia Pacific region playoffs. Let's talk about round one. So the first, only one round one match, and that was Chengdu versus London. Chengdu takes that one down 3-1. And
why aren't you in chat?
I know, Finney just didn't show up in shame. Going on to round two, NYXL takes out Chengdu 3-2, and Seoul wins 3-0 versus Guangzhou. We now have our 4-team double elimination bracket set up for round number 3. Shanghai beats NYXL 3-1. Seoul wins 3-0 versus Guangzhou. So those are the matches that happened. The matches we have for this week are going to be Shanghai versus Seoul in the winner's bracket, Guangzhou versus NY in the loser's bracket, and then it plays out accordingly there. Death, did you get to see too much of the Asia bracket?
My VOD watching this week, as I said, was significantly less, but thankfully my insomnia was at its peak this weekend, so I caught some of it for sure. Notably, I want to talk the most about that Shanghai versus New York matchup, and the reason I want to talk about it is because I think there's a really good chance we're going to see it again.
Yeah.
Well, we wouldn't see it again. Maybe in the absolute Final Four here.
Right.
But that was 3-1 on the scoreboard. It went to 5 maps. They drew a map in there, and New York looked really, really good to me. Now they won the slobber knocker versus the Chengdu Hunters. That was close, but there was a lot of reason to expect Chengdu to perform pretty well, and I think we saw that. So props to Chengdu. They gave it a run. They weren't able to get into the double elim portion of things, which would have helped them tremendously.
Yeah.
But Seoul wasn't having it.
No.
They're on a tear. I really, really need to watch Seoul versus Guangzhou, because that to me is going to inform a lot of what will be my actual picks that I may or may not put on Twitter or whatever, but what I actually think will happen. But with what I have to go off of, looking at the way this is playing out, we've got Seoul, who again I believe is playing mostly the dive composition. I believe that's what I saw from New York and Shanghai the most as well. It just seems to fit these teams, what their rosters want to be doing. And also I think it's the best form of Overwatch in this meta. So I think those 3 teams are all really, really well equipped. I'm terrified for Guangzhou, the fact that they just couldn't even compete with Seoul there. I mean, at least on the scoreboard, not all 3-0s are created equal.
Right.
That really has me worried for them, and seeing how good New York looked and how flexible they were able to be within the confines of their roster, and who was out there, just had me really, really hopeful for them. I actually thought when I woke up and saw the end result for Shanghai versus New York, I thought it was 50-50, and I thought it would read 3-2 no matter which way it went. And
it kind of did in a way with the drawn map.
With the draw, yeah. In New York, I think really outperformed Shanghai on that drawn map. They just 2CP, it just doesn't always work out. So yeah, I mean, really good look from New York in the playoffs. I'd never said that before.
So that is a rare thing to say.
Yeah, that they seem to have stepped it up there. And if you can talk about, would you make that trade from being the season 1 team that was the favorites and so dominant into a disappointment to being the team that clutches it up at the end, but maybe was a little more middle of the pack.
Right.
And let's be honest, they probably wouldn't have been middle of the pack if they stayed in NA. It really, I think, is a trade that they would make, and it's one this team really desperately needs, right? Because if this doesn't work, right, if they can't level up and make it into the Final Four, they don't have to win the whole thing, but like, where do you go from there with all that talent? Do you just cut it and start from scratch? Do you London yourself? That's a tough commitment to make.
God, don't even say that.
But it might have been what they needed to do, right? If they were just like one and done and out before, in the elimination rounds, the play-ins, that would have been a brutal blow for New York, and very awkward to manage from there. So they really need this. They need the win versus Guangzhou. They just kind of, again, there's 3 matches to discuss here in this bracket, so we'll just knock them out. I've got Shanghai beating Seoul. It's the stakes aren't high enough for Shanghai to collapse on themselves. I've got New York beating Guangzhou. Again, I'm just really high on them and how they were able to look. If they can clean up some mistakes and iron some things out, I think they're really, really high up there, and the imaginary power rankings we don't put out. So that leaves us Seoul versus New York for that last spot. It's hard to pick because I haven't seen much Seoul. My gut says if this roster for Seoul is feeling it and playing well, they're probably gonna get the win. But again, even with that, it's the same thing. But name 2 scarier rosters to be performing at their absolute best and on a tear, and it's hard to to get any scarier than the Seoul Dynasty and the New York Excelsior with how much we've seen of them in the past and how confident you can be in their clutch ability. They're maybe less so for New York, but especially on the Seoul side, you know, like Prophet wakes up in the big moments, and that's terrifying because he's so good in the mundane moments too. That is, you know, so I'll lean on Seoul there, but again, we're talking like 52, 48% or something like that. Like it's really, really close. So yeah, I think Seoul and Shanghai are my current favorites to make it out here. But New York absolutely has a massive, massive window. What did you get to see from APAC this week, and what are your thoughts? I mean, I know I know what your prediction would be, for the entire bracket, but
of course my prediction is going to be NY easily winning.
10-0.
It's not, and actually taking both spots somehow, due to technicality. But no, I think
Jonak gets one spot for himself,
and then Pine gets the other one. Yep.
Stop living in the past, man.
No, he gets to just occupy a whole spot, even though he's not on the team. So I think NY, like you said, would you trade the dominance of season one and then kind of petering out in the playoffs for, you know, the opportunity that you have now, where NY was very good during the season. Obviously, they're the number 3 rank in the. I mean, it's hard to compare the two regions, but I think most people would say the stronger region, at least, per capita of team, the stronger region, I would think, or I would think most people would say at least.
I'll say at least, almost definitely the most competitive region of the two.
Right. Yeah, the floor is much higher in the APAC region than the NA region. That is unarguably true. And I think going into the playoffs, I mean, we've already seen it, right? Like, you know, they had a really close one against Chengdu and a really close one versus Shanghai, and like, yes, they lost 3-0, but again, we already talked about how that was actually much closer than it was. But like, Shanghai has been like dominant most of the season. So even putting up a performance like that is good. And what I like is like they actually have to play from behind, right? Like they got there because it's double elim. Like there's not ever really been, and I'm not counting the previous tournaments of the season. Those don't count for any sort of stakes in my mind. They've never had a tournament where it's double elim, where they like, you know, they get to lose their one life and then come back with a vengeance. They've never had to do that. I mean, no team really has, right? So, you know, the hashtag choke for NY, like maybe this was their choke already, but now they get to come back and we get to actually see what they're capable of. They don't have to look at like, oh, well, we didn't live up to expectation, let's do it next year. They now go, oh, we didn't live up to expectation, let's get it in gear and win this thing now. And now, of course, every team has the ability to do that. So it's not like NY is, somewhere necessarily different than the other teams, but none of the other teams have really had the like, oh, you should have won a season, right? Like you were the favorite by a wide margin and you came up not only short, you didn't even make it to the finals. You didn't even get to play in your, I mean, not the player's hometown, but the team's hometown. Like season one was made for New York to win. Everyone knows that, and they blew it in the playoffs. They get to actually show whether or not they have that hunger, right? And like you said, Death, what do you do from here? If like NY loses like, 3-1 to Guangzhou here, what do you do? I mean, it's really tough, but the more I've been thinking about it,
you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. Meko doesn't come back.
Right.
So your option is to like move on from other pieces. It's convenient to just throw it at the feet of the new guy. And I think there was definitely a downgrade with, going from Meko to Hatpa.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about that, but
throwing it at anyone doesn't change the fact that you don't have a title. That's the thing.
Right. And it doesn't change enough to just keep recycling off tanks until you win. Like there is your players will degrade. I mean, no Overwatch player has been wall to wall from the days of playing in ZP's basement on Alienware monthly melees to now. Who's even still here at that level?
Most of those players are gone, or at least a lot of them are.
Prophet, Surefour with a foot out the door.
Wow.
Like they're just,
if he plays,
there's not much left from those days. So there is going to be a lot of turnover in Overwatch, and there is, I think, more so than other esports. Granted, I'm not super deep and following a ton of them, but the faker play, everybody knows the faker play. That was forever ago, and that guy's still around, I'm pretty sure, right? So like
he was
there
15 when he won his first championship.
Yeah,
I mean, I guess I don't know how old he is.
I think there'll be more turnover here than in other places, and the window's been closing for New York for a season and a half now.
Yeah,
it's not opening, so you need to, if you're not going to take advantage of it and do something now, a blow it up kind of a situation becomes almost the logical next step. And when you're third in the APAC region with the combined career record that all these players have and the organization has, it's like crazy to think that you might do that, but I don't know that there would have been an alternative.
Yeah, I mean, the choice is, do you start over and try to win a championship in like 2 or 3 years, or do you like just try to squeeze out,
cling to the last remaining threads of hope?
Well, I mean, the problem is like the Shocks of the world, the Shanghais of the world, the Seoul dynasties of the world, like they're not, like they have all gone through some sort of like revitalization of some sort. Like they've gotten better in a lot of ways. Like, I mean, it's hard to compare, the first half of season 1 for San Francisco, but even like just season 1 San Francisco in general, between season 1 and season 2, and like they're not the same level of dominance that they were compared to everyone else at the end of season 2, but they're like, they're still on top of the world in a lot of ways. Just some of the other teams got better. Philly got better. Some of these other teams have been able to compete against San Francisco. New York does not seem, they have some, prospects and players that they've certainly been getting more out of. But man, it is not going to be, like you said, I think it is a blow it up. I mean, maybe you keep your new guys and like a Jonak, maybe, but like, I think you got to go a whole new direction, and that's about as volatile as it can be, right? You have no idea how that team is going to perform. You have and not to mention the fact that you like have to rebuild synergy, even if you have it on paper, it doesn't matter. So like now is obviously the time for NY. I mean, I've talked about this in every playoffs, right? Like as a team, like it's where, do they have it in them or not? Do they want to win it? Are they really driven to do it? Now is the time to do it. This is the best shot to do it. It's just whether or not they can perform and do it. So I don't know. I mean, I obviously have faith in them because I am a diehard, dyed-in-the-wool. I have no choice. I'm wearing the hat, okay? The alt color hat that I waited in line for. The alt color hat I waited in line for 5 hours to get. I'm sticking with the team, but I mean, I would love. So I mean, not to belabor the point that I've belabored for way too long already. I would absolutely love to see New York and Seoul go to Asia and play in the grand finals. It's really hard to not pick Shanghai as one of those spots. But man, there are few rivalries that span back to season 1 that are as like heads up and crazy as Seoul versus New York. Yeah, Prophet versus me. Seoul versus New York. It's just iconic in my mind. It's been since the very beginning. It's been like the iconic matchup, and those teams always play up against each other. It's almost always a good match. I mean, recently maybe sometimes it wasn't, but like I'd love
And
to see
I
it.
do think it's enhanced by the team that won season 1, which was the year of the Excelsior
Mhm.
that almost was, and now they're over here on the team that there's kind of been that symbolic rivalry with in its own way. I've never felt that rivalry personally myself, but rivalries are felt by the fan bases, and I'm just not in it, so it makes a lot of sense. But if it's put up and shut up time for New York, Blevins, it's put up or shut up time for you.
Yes.
If you take the 5-0 easiest of my life out of it, do you honestly have New York making it into the top 2? Do you think they're the second best team in the APAC region?
I think that they will beat Guangzhou, and I think that it will be a slobber knocker versus Seoul, but I think they can do it. If they have to play Shanghai again, it's certainly going to be tough. I think that they can honestly do it. They have the footage on Shanghai. If Seoul wins and Seoul's actually on a tear, good for them. We have to play Shanghai. There's adjustments that can be made. They can. I mean, I'm trying to think.
It was close enough. You can turn it for sure.
It's tough. I don't know if they're. I'd have to look, but I don't know a time that NY has lost to a team twice in a row. Actually, I do. That happened last season against Atlanta, but it's very rare that it happens. So I think that they actually have a legitimate shot of making it. One
more question for you. Let's say you're wrong, and it's Seoul versus New York in the second game of the weekend for them, and they lose. As a fan of New York, is that enough for you, or are you looking for big changes? Are you looking for a shakeup?
It's tough because if they're doing a blow up, it's like as a fan, it's a huge investment of like, you have to just objectively go into the season not thinking that they're going to win, which is what London Spitfire.
And then you've got to ask yourself how many of them are going to be wearing Houston Outlaws jerseys by the time the next season comes around.
How many scumbag traders are going to go play for a mediocre team that loses to the Boston Uprising in the first round? I don't know, but I hope you like the bed that you made, Mecco, you filthy traitor. I'm glad they lost. I forgot that. I wasn't even thinking about him being on the team. They got exactly what they deserved. Scum. I can't do the shame bell because it's just me. There's no actual shame in it. It's just me.
There's nothing here.
There's nothing to be shameful. It's just me being upset about it. I want them to get the dub, obviously. If they don't and they lose, if they lose to Guangzhou here, that's just to me, that's just as much of a disappointment. Well, it's not as much of a disappointment as season 1, but it's similar.
Yeah. You got to capitalize on a team. You got to be the shark that smells blood in the water and puts this team down if you want to be one of the better ones. It's another thing to lose to a hot team. It's another thing to lose to a team that looks like they've got a foot out the door and are on their way to just take themselves out of the playoffs as fast as humanly possible.
This is what I'll say. If they don't win now, the running it back next season is not going to be a better shot. So I think if you want to put yourself in contention to win a championship, which in my, and I believe yours too, Death's opinion, should be the ultimate goal for every single team to win a Overwatch League championship. Everything else before that or different than that is just a stepping stone towards the championship. Running it back with the same team is not going to give you a better shot than you do now, but blowing it up and having and investing in a team that you just change everything about or change something about, and in 2 years they're a contender, maybe that's what needs to be done. I don't know. Maybe it's just pick up the best Korean contenders team and just work that into an sand down the edges, the rough edges of what not being in the Overwatch League would give to you, and just run with that. I don't know. But I think if they don't win it here, they don't even make it to the finals, they don't make it to the final stage, I think it's a real discussion to to really make big changes going into next season.
All right. So we're no matter what, I think there's very few options here that lead us with a bad Final Four. I think that's my big takeaway this first weekend of the playoffs is that we're very likely in for a treat when these guys get on to maybe not land, but onto close ping, and we mix the regions up with the top four. I think Washington and the Valiant are the two teams that stand out to me as would a little bit ruin the experience. The rest of them, even Atlanta, they kind of would, but like they have an upward ability to play just on hype, right? Like, they can just operate on pure hype and energy, and I think allow themselves to play at a level that other teams can't. And we haven't seen it from them yet this year, so I'm tempted to put them in that potential ruiners category. But Philly, San Francisco, and Florida all are very viable top four contenders to go on. And then I think, really all the remaining teams in APAC are just fine, because there's a world where Guangzhou just had a bad day and they come back and they're fine and they're a top tier team. I'm not selling on them yet. I'm very nervous. I never like to see a team. I didn't watch it, so I don't want to sit here and say they choked, but a team that just bounces like that when they've got the 2 seed going into the playoffs, and to get bodied by a 5 seed is a red flag, to say the least. But I think we're really headed towards a really, really hype, really exciting top four, and in a year that really needs it, right? So much went wrong, so much was out of, not that it was anybody's fault, okay, notwithstanding.
I was gonna say some of it was.
Some of it was fault, but for the most part, it was just the circumstances of being alive in the year 2020 that dictated a lot of the weirdness that we're going through. And this season needs a great ending, and I think we're on our way to it. And as long as Washington is just a flare up,
shame.
I'm comparing him to herpes now. As long as it's just a quick little flare up, and there
it can be treated.
Right. Yeah. We could just take care of it and move on and pretend like it didn't happen. I think as long as that's the case, and as long as the Valiant don't spike it and then ruin a really good matchup or two in the Final Four, we're in for a really good time here.
Yeah, no, I agree as well. And I'm just hoping, obviously I'm hoping that NYXL wins the whole thing. So that's all I care about. But outside of that,
I hope Houston wins the whole thing, but we're not going to get what
no, filthy traitor Mecco deserves nothing but losses for the rest of his career. I hope we have a competitive finals. That's what I want. More so than anything else. So I do think that we're on track for that, and that is that's a good thing. But all right, Death, we made it. We made it through. We've got our predictions. We're pretty much in full agreement on the NA side, and then my NYXL bias bleeds entirely through on my side, but you've got a pretty good understanding of where we stand. I'm not trying to deny it. It would be
your biased
stupid.
opinion is very, very viable, though.
Yeah, exactly.
Your bias didn't take you into uncharted waters, but we just didn't ask you to read map scores because we've got 2-3 years of evidence to show that that's meaningless.
it certainly is. But that's going to be it for this week, Death. We had a packed weekend of OWL playoffs, and we've just got a handful more. We had a handful more going into it. So that is going to be it. Anything else we want to touch on before we get going, Death?
What else is there, Blevins? Unless we want to start the hour block of our first NFL podcast.
No, the right co-host for that is in chat, not on the call right now. But all right. Well, chat and listeners at home, thank you for listening and watching. Of course, you can find everything that we do. High Noon Podcast. We're everywhere you can find podcasts, and pretty much every non-Zoomer social media. I don't think we have. I don't know, Death. Have you started a High Noon Podcast TikTok yet? I don't know. I haven't.
It had been so long since I used the TikTok that I made for me that like it actually is just gone, and now I'm not logged in on the app. It's weird.
Oh,
You're
interesting.
banned.
Probably banned. Yeah, we probably deserve it. But Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, all of that stuff. High Noon Podcast, and then again everywhere that you can find podcasts. Death, where can people find you on the internet when you're not here on the show?
Deathblow TTV everywhere, on Twitch, on Twitter, and I don't really try not to use the internet otherwise.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I mean,
that exist. Yes. And of course, you can find me on Twitter at @the_Blevins, and you can find both of us on the High Noon Podcast Discord, discord.me/High Noon Podcast. But that is gonna be it for Deathlaw and Blevins. And remember, it's High Noon.